Tech Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
I'm going to say the same thing that everyone else said. I totally can't see you guys, so I'll just pretend I'm at home or something practicing. My name is Rachna Choudhry. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I have been here for about 24 hours, and D.C. is so not like Vegas, so I'm excited to be here. Yeah, it's a good thing. So I am talking about culture also, so it's kind of neat to speak right after Divya, and the culture of tradition. How many of you guys remember how a bill becomes a law? Probably learned about it in high school. Yeah, there's a song. So the way a bill becomes a law hasn't changed. It's tradition, and it hasn't changed since the 1700s, right? Since our country was founded. And the way people influence legislation hasn't changed. And that's like over 200 years, almost 250 years of that same tradition and the same way of doing politics and the same way of doing policy making. And when I say DC is entrenched in tradition, it's because there hasn't been any type of change in that. In the same way, it's created a culture that's a zero-sum game, right? There's winners and losers. When you look at politics today, you clearly see a winner, you clearly see a loser. And in terms of policy making, there's winners and losers as well. And the culture of lobbying, I'm sure you guys know all about lobbyists. That hasn't changed either. The first lobbyists sprung in DC in the first Congress. We've had lobbyists for over 200 years. But what has changed is that the whole lobbying machine has just grown and become more sophisticated. And as a result, what we're seeing is more and more people, regular people outside of the Beltway, outside of DC, are getting more and more frustrated with their elected officials. And they're feeling that frustration when it comes to things like the government shutdown. You're seeing it with Tea Party groups, and you're seeing that frustration because people don't feel like their voice is getting heard in issues that matter on Capitol Hill. So that's why I created my company. I was a lobbyist, and I don't know, I can't see your reactions now, but I'm usually, people are like, ugh. Yes. Thanks for thinking, sad face. I was a lobbyist, and quickly I realized after trying to talk to people outside of Washington about issues that were important to them, and then actually lobbying Congress, that there was this huge disconnect between what people wanted their elected officials to do and what the people were saying versus what Congress was hearing. And as a result, what was happening was that there was so much noise and too little signal. And that's where I co-founded popvox.com. My co-founder, Marcy Harris, was a congressional staffer at the time, and she was seeing the same problem, but from the congressional staffer side, where she felt that they were getting inundated with messages with no way of knowing who was a real constituent or who was signing their name on a petition as Mickey Mouse. And I think that the fancy word they use for it is AstroTurf. So instead of grassroots, kind of. So, get it? Yeah. So DC has a lot of buzzwords, and that was another part of the problem. When you have an industry that's very based on tradition and entrenched with buzzwords and what you need to know and smoke-filled back rooms, you never know how to get the information you need. And people just want information. They don't need the rhetoric. They don't need the buzzwords. And what we wanted to do at PopVox was kick down the door and let people in, make democracy more democratic. And that's what we set out to do. We founded the company about 2.5 years ago. And if you go to popvox.com, you can find any and every bill pending before Congress, and you can write your own letter. And we aggregate that with thousands of other people. So in real time, the media, the public, anybody, the community, can see what support and opposition looks like for every single bill pending before Congress. So many times I'm speaking to people and people say, well, why do people even care about what's happening in Congress? Well, these are issues that affect our daily lives. And oftentimes when you're watching the TV news, you just hear about the issues that are like controversial, or the ones that are getting, you know, a lot of attention, like immigration or government funding and the shutdown. But I was just talking to Jen yesterday, and she told me about our puppy. And I don't know if Jen knows, I can't see your face, but I don't know if you know that there's a bill pending in Congress that would regulate the puppy mill industry, right? So these are bills that affect our daily lives. And so far in this year alone, over 6,000 bills have been introduced in Congress. So bringing back to why I'm here in Vegas, the culture of innovation here is very different than in DC. When I started my company, we did face a lot of that feeling of, well, why are you doing this? This wouldn't work. And just a lot of no's, you know, like, nope, that's just too out of the box. But the reality is, when you're here in a place like Vegas where being non-traditional is celebrated, or someone yesterday said to me, oh, it's great to be wacky in Vegas. And that's great. And you might not be living in Washington, D.C. You're here in a very unique culture. But many of you might be working to innovate in industries that are based in tradition. And that kind of is what D.C. politics is about. And how do you innovate when you're in an industry that's very tradition-bound? So I thought I would share with you some 5 tips that I've learned and that I like to share with others that are trying to innovate. And if I had known this 2.5 years ago, it would have saved me a lot of nail biting or frustration. So first is trust your instinct. I was a lobbyist. I knew exactly what that congressional staffer needed when I went and met with her in terms of what they call air cover, right? Like, their member of Congress wants to vote a certain way. They just need the information or the stories from constituents to back them up on it. So if they, you know, are in the hot seat for voting a particular way, they have a reason why. So trust your instinct. The second is build on what you know. In a culture that's very tradition-bound, it's important to know the pain point that you're trying to solve, the problem that you're trying to solve, and you know it by having lived it. PopVox we generate revenue with clients that use our services to do grassroots advocacy with their membership. It's much easier for me to talk to a client or a prospective client and say, hey, I understand what you're going through. I might not know your issue, but I know what it's like when you're trying to mobilize people around an issue and trying to create some impact in Congress. The third point that I want to make is verify with others. Now, when we started PopVox, and we went and we talked to just about every person that would listen to us about our idea, just to get feedback, to see what people were saying. And quite often, we just get the, nah, sounds like a good idea, but it won't work in DC. And we kept getting that over and over, but we trusted our instinct, and we said, no, we're just going to go do this because we're sure it's going to work. But the amount of times you start hearing no, it's easy to start second-guessing yourself, and that's something you really don't want to do, but you want to verify that what your instinct is correct. So trust your instinct, but then back it up with validation. And we still do that today. I happen to live across the street from a coffee shop, so it's a very great place to do my work. But also, there's always random people there where I can say, hey, we're trying out this new product or this new feature on PopVox. Will you just take a look and tell me what you think? And just by watching them, I know exactly what's wrong with it or what's right with it. And oftentimes, there are lobbyists there. There's congressional staffers, like whoever it is that has something to add about their own experience and why this tool would work or would not work for them. So verify what you're doing with others, just so you have backup. The fourth point that I often learn the hard way is to focus on what you're doing and don't get freaked out by your competitors. And when we first started, there was a lot of other companies that we'd been hearing about, and a lot of people that would tell us, oh, that's a great idea, but you know, I think that other group is doing the same thing. And then all of a sudden we get all nervous and get on Google and trying to find what the other person was doing. And then it would just, you know, waste like a couple hours of our time, like with all this nervous energy that we could have spent just working on what we were doing and the goals that we had set out to achieve. And the fifth point is to ignore shiny objects. Now, in my personal life, I love shiny objects, you know, anything that's like pink or sparkly. I'm like, ooh. But when it comes to me as a co-founder, I want to stick to my plan and stick to what I set out to solve in the first place. And especially in a culture that that's just entrenched with tradition and the status quo, sometimes it's not the best thing to like shift this way, shift that way, and change direction as you're trying to move forward. What we did, which I think most companies do, is just wrote a very detailed business plan of what we wanted to accomplish with our company, and we wrote the biggest possible idea that we had, right? We wrote every single detail down. And even today, my co-founder and I were meeting, and we were talking about some new feature that we wanted to create. And she said, you know, I think that was in the original business plan. I was like, hell yeah, it was, because that's what we had set out to do. And that what that allows you to do is it gives entrepreneurs a place to look back on, but then also you don't get attracted to like new ideas. I'm not saying don't look at new ideas, but just remember what you were setting out to solve in the first place and focus on that. I want to end by just telling you about just a little big picture about Popvox and what we've been able to accomplish. We now have 350,000 users from across the country, and collectively they've sent 3 million or so messages into Congress. And most recently, do you guys remember the air traffic controllers went on furlough, and then there was all these flight delays and stuff in the springtime? So when that happened, people came to Popvox to write a letter to their member of Congress about getting air traffic controllers back to work. And in about 2 weeks' time, we had thousands and thousands of people that were writing letters to Congress about this issue. And a lot of them were literally at the airport waiting for their delayed flight, writing a letter to Congress on their iPhone or Windows Phone or whatever. And that power of people coming together around an issue actually worked, because 2 weeks later, guess what happened? Congress passed a bill that enabled all air traffic controllers to come back to work, and the problem was solved. I'm not saying that happens all the time when people write to Congress, but that's what we want. We want to engage more people around the issues they care about. Thank you.
Thank you.